I recently found myself awake at 3 a.m., like any responsible adult, wondering what fresh disaster had befallen humanity this time. Climate collapse? Been there. Global pandemics? Done that. Billionaires trying to colonize Mars while we can't afford rent? Done that too. But no, this time, I discovered that scientists in the United States, a nation that spends more on military parades than on public health, no longer have enough money to buy lab mice. Yes, you heard that correctly. The scientific engine of the modern world is short on rodents. Actual mice. The squeaky kind. I don't know about you, but when a country that can afford to launch private celebrities into orbit can't afford small mammals for scientific inquiry, I feel a strange tingle in my spine. It might be the collapse of Western civilization, or just my daily existential panic. Hard to tell. Now, I'm no scientist. I don't wear a lab coat, I don't own a centrifuge, and I've never uttered the phrase double-blind, placebo-controlled study in casual conversation. But even I know that mice are to research what wheels are to cars. You take away the mice, and suddenly your entire biomedical empire is held together with duct tape, wishful thinking, and a few expired PCR tests from 2020. But let's slow down. Let's be rational. Let's walk through this process like the very scientists we're apparently now defunding. Step 1. Observe. Scientists are broke. They can't afford mice. Some are literally breeding them in the janitor's closet behind the mop bucket. Okay, I made that last part up, but not really. If this continues, we might see crowdfunding campaigns titled, Adopt a Lab Mouse. Save Science. Step 2. Ask a question. Something like, how in the name of all that is rational did we get here? How did we, a society with streaming platforms dedicated to documentaries about ants and space dust, reach the point where we can't scrape together enough pennies to supply scientists with rodents? Step 3. Form a hypothesis. I've got one. Maybe, just maybe, our national priorities are about as well calibrated as a squirrel with a compass in a magnet factory. We pour billions into making weapons that can blow up half a continent, but funding basic research? Mice don't vote.
Mice don't lobby.
Mice don't host fundraisers. So, naturally, they're not in the budget. Step 4. Experiment. And by experiment, I mean get yourself a lab mouse if you can find one. Not name it. Not cuddle it. Not knit it a sweater and post photos on Instagram. No, you get the mouse, subject it to a carefully controlled scientific process that will hopefully yield data relevant to curing cancer, developing vaccines, or figuring out why people think astrology is real science and climate change isn't. After the experiment, you analyze the results, reach a conclusion, publish a paper in a journal nobody outside of academia will ever read, and pray someone funds your next grant proposal. And if there are no mice, well, I guess you analyze the behavior of fruit flies and try to convince the NIH that they're close enough. I can't help but picture the budget meetings that led to this. Some bureaucrat in a suit looks at a spreadsheet and goes, do we really need all these mice? Can't the scientists just simulate them with ChatGPT? Because nothing says rigorous biology like asking an AI to pretend it has cancer so you can test a drug on it. And don't even get me started on the politicians. The same people who think evolution is a hoax and who once asked if the moon is part of Mars are now in charge of deciding how many mice a lab should have. It's like putting a toddler in charge of a nuclear reactor because they once played with Legos. I mean, we could solve this. We could reallocate funds. We could treat science as something other than a hobby for nerds who don't own yachts. But that would require political will, public interest, and a basic understanding of how vaccines are made, which, judging by recent events, might be asking too much. Instead, we get headlines like, research delayed due to mouse shortage, and I have to sit with the fact that this is not a dystopian novel, but actual real life. It's 2025, and somehow we've entered the era of rodent austerity. Meanwhile, the mice who do make it into the lab are living like royalty. They're the 1% of the mouse world. Selected, pampered, monitored. Their cousins are out there in the wild chewing through cereal boxes, while these elite mice get tiny houses, fancy diets, and more medical attention than the average uninsured human. And what happens to these privileged mice after the experiment is over? Do they get a pension? A tiny gold watch? A commemorative plaque?
No.
They get analyzed, euthanized, and memorialized in footnotes. And still, they serve a nobler purpose than most billionaires. Of course, there's always the option of skipping the mice altogether. We could test drugs directly on humans, maybe start with the people who voted to cut the science budget. That way, we'd get data and poetic justice all in one. But we won't, because this country would rather cancel a promising study than offend a lobbyist. We'd rather let a disease run wild than admit we need boring, unsexy funding for basic science. Because nothing says land of opportunity like turning science into a luxury item right alongside avocado toast and healthcare. Now, I'm just spitballing here, but maybe, just maybe, science should not be subject to the whims of annual budget negotiations that get decided by people whose only experiment was mixing bleach and vinegar in a high school bathroom. Maybe the future of cancer treatment shouldn't hinge on whether or not a senator believes in evolution. Maybe the next generation of vaccines shouldn't depend on whether a university can afford a cage of mice this quarter. But hey, who am I to judge? I'm just a civilian watching from the sidelines while the people in charge ask, can't we just Google the cure? Or worse, is this even necessary? And somewhere in a lab, a scientist sighs, looks at the empty cage, and realizes that even if they had the money for the mouse, they probably wouldn't have the staff to feed it. Because funding cuts don't stop at rodents. They devour everything. Let's not forget, this is the same country that funds football stadiums with public money while making PhD researchers sell plasma to buy pipettes. The same country that gives tax breaks to oil companies but won't cover a graduate student's conference travel. The same country that believes God made the world in 7 days but won't fund a study to figure out how long it actually took. We are, in short, a scientific superpower with the fiscal planning skills of a raccoon in a dumpster fire. But don't worry, hope is not lost. If enough people get upset, if enough memes get made, if we all scream in one collective voice, by the damn mice, then maybe, just maybe, someone will listen. Maybe a billionaire will adopt a lab and become the patron saint of rodent research. Maybe lab mice will go viral on TikTok, and we'll raise funding through influencer merch. Until then, I suggest we get creative. Maybe start training cockroaches. They're abundant, hardy, and already live rent-free in our government buildings. Or better yet, let's put Congress in a maze and see how long it takes them to find the cheese. Call it an experiment in behavioral science. Of course, the final analysis is this. If we continue to treat scientific research like an optional subscription plan, we're not just hurting scientists. We're hurting everyone. Because that mouse, the one we didn't buy, it might have helped find the treatment for your cousin's rare disease. Or the next vaccine. Or the data that could have saved a generation.
But no.
Instead, we bought tanks. And golf trips. And political ads. Because apparently democracy means choosing which mice live and which experiments die. So here we are. America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, and the place where you need a Kickstarter to fund a lab rat. If irony had a capital, it would be Washington, D.C., and the national mascot wouldn't be the bald eagle. It would be a scientist holding an empty cage.